All right, so the title of this presentation is From Dirtbag to Olympia, and it covers a rather unusual, remarkable period in sporting history, in that it's very rare for a sport to appear on the international scene and then with such a short history, and then suddenly be elevated into the hallowed ranks of the Olympic Games. In the case of mountain biking, this happened in the space of only 3 years. And it happened as a result of some unusual circumstances, which were based a lot on, well, there was a lot of happenstance and you might say stars being aligned. But it also took a great deal of hard work and skillful work on the part of a few people who really have received almost no recognition for their contribution to the sport of mountain biking, for better or for worse. And I think that the underpinning thing here is that when mountain biking first appeared, really everybody that I was around really wanted it to be in the Olympics. That was seen as a huge thing, and I'm sort of interested at some point to get your opinion on that, Joe Breeze, the guy who came up with, well, it's not here, but anyway. We're going from, I'm calling it From Dirtbag. This is a photograph of the 1990 World Championships in Durango. It's the first UCI World Championships. And to me, this looks like a pretty good setup. A lot of very high quality organization, big field, lots of people, to Olympia, which actually doesn't look that different to me. If anything, it's a smaller field. So this is all about how Breaking Eggs got mountain bike into the Olympics. Before I start, though, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, since I think maybe 2 or 3 people I can see actually know who I am and anything about my background. My name's Paul Skilbeck, and my education I'm a journalist. My education in journalism began in 1985 when I read an American book called The New Journalism it's an anthology put together by a guy called Tom Wolfe, who some of you may have heard of. After that, I decided I was going to be a journalist, and that was going to be my education. And as it happened, that seemed to be good enough. In 1993, I finished a Bachelor of Science degree course in Sports Science and Recreation Management at a university in the UK called Loughborough. This picture is from 1998, which was my first mountain bike race in a Fisher jersey. That was in the UK. And then this next one is 1992. I sort of decided I wasn't going to be a great bike racer, but I was going to be a great journalist. And this is me here, me here in the scrum there. That's John Turnback, and the rest of them are a bunch of journalists. Velo News hired me, the American publication, which I guess several people are familiar with, which was at the time the world's #1 cycling publication. They hired me to be a stringer. I was freelance, but I was on their masthead as the European mountain bike correspondent. And in that role, I attended just heaps and heaps of mountain bike World Cup and World Championship races in the day. This is the first book that I wrote, which was in 1993. I felt like I'd finished my degree course, and I realized I wasn't going to be a sports scientist, and I wanted to do something with the education that I'd gained. And so a publisher contacted me and asked me to write this book, so I wrote that book. And then a couple of years later, I came up with a book which was based on what I'd learned from speaking to all the top pros on the mountain bike circuit about their racing, their training techniques and so on. And this was published by Velo News. It was the first serious effort, or early serious effort, in trying to document what it takes to be a mountain bike racer in terms of training and so on. Then shortly afterwards, about a year afterwards, I edited the first of a series of the official guide to the Mountain Bike World Cup. And that got me fired by Velo News because they were also doing a Mountain Bike World Cup guide, and they thought that the reason I was involved with this is the reason that they didn't get the UCI contract to have the official guide, which turned out to be not correct. But as a direct result of being fired by Velo News, that same year, the UCI asked me if I would create their first website. So I suddenly became the UCI website editor. And I'll tell you how that happened a little bit later. It was a very personal thing. And as it happens, a lot of really big decisions in cycling are very personal, irrational things. 1997, I created an organization called the Mountain Bike Press Association, which was intended just to get better access for some journalists at mountain bike events and sort of standardize things a little bit. And then 1988, 89 and 89, sorry, 98 and 99, I was the press officer at the World Championships. And then in 2000, I was at the Sydney Olympics as a mountain bike media consultant. And that was the end of my association with the Olympic movement. And by then I was living in the USA and worked as a communication director for the Sea Otter Classic, and then spent 5 years as a media consultant on the Norba series. So that's all about me. You've got an idea now who I am and what I was doing and when. The moral of the story is that you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. And the origin of that saying was France in 1740s, about 40 years before the French Revolution. So you can sort of see where they were leading with that. And certainly in this story, this story about mountain biking, lots of eggs do get broken. And whether or not we like the omelette is really subjective. So the focus of the talk is about how mountain biking was accepted into the Olympic program only 3 years after its first World Championships. And it's a fairly short period in the history of cycling. This is about the history of it really from 1870 up to 2024. This is sort of the mountain bike golden era. The mountain bike here, the other golden age was in late 1800s, 1880s to late 1890s. But the story's going to start here in 1964 at the Tokyo Olympics. And it starts with doping scandals, and which were primarily in cycling. And so what was happening is that and a number of the audience may have already be aware of the tactics that cyclists were using to get around doping tests. But what they were doing, doping tests back then were urine-based. They'd take a urine sample and then they'd analyze that. So what a lot of the pro cyclists did is they would obtain a bag of urine from somebody else who hadn't been doping, and they'd secrete that in their clothing. And back then, the testers would give you privacy while you were submitting your test, which was very decent of them, and very rapidly and happily, gleefully, you might say, exploited by the pro cyclists. So the IOC was sick of the scandal. They didn't like the earache they were getting about it, and they decided that they were going to ban sports which had a mix of both amateur and professional athletes, which meant that cycling would have been out of the Olympics. And so what the UCI did is they broke cycling up into two parts, FIAC and FICP. So, and then the UCI became a coordinating body. And this meant that the UCI Secretariat really, it shrunk. And it came down, for many years, the UCI was just two people. And they were running they were the coordinating body between FIAC and FICP. And FIAC had certainly elevated significance at this point because it was the Olympic sport, and professional cycling wasn't. So next we move into 1976 and the Montreal Olympics, which was a big wake-up call for the Olympic movement. The Montreal Olympic Stadium was supposed to look like this, but at the time of the 1976 Games, it looked like this. And this is a picture actually taken during the Games. You can see the crowd moving around the stadium. And it was just the biggest budget blowout. It's a 1.11 Montreal with a 1.6 billion debt and a 40-year hangover. As far as the Olympic movement was concerned, they realized that they needed to have a rethink. But the early principles of Olympism, which were based entirely on amateurism and the idea that you could make a business out of the Olympics, was anathema. And they realized that that wasn't going to work for them anymore. They had to have some changes. So they started to make changes and started to make the Olympics more commercial. And then came the financial triumph of the Los Angeles Olympics, which was a model of American capitalism at its best. The Olympic Games didn't lose any money. It may even have turned a small profit, and everybody was happy. And the IOC was in fact so pleased and so encouraged by that shortly after that they decided that the USA and not Greece would be the venue for their centenary games in 1996. And the 1996 games it was a huge milestone for the Olympic movement. These games were extremely important to the then head of the IOC, a guy called Juan Antonio Samaranch, and the success of the games was immensely important to him. And also, they decided that Atlanta would be the host city. Not least of which because that was the seat of Coca-Cola. So it gives you an idea which way the Olympics was moving. So with the lessons learned from LA '84, the Olympics quickly starts making a lot of money. In TV broadcast rights alone, so Montreal, they had the TV broadcast rights for $35 million. By 1992 in Barcelona, that had increased almost 20-fold to $636 million. And then in 2014, we see that NBC extends its rights through 2032 for $7.75 billion. Which also puts it keeps the pressure on the Olympic movement as well, because they've got all this money now from television rights, and so their job then is to make sure they get the audience in order to keep the television rights holders happy. Okay, so now we're going to move back to that was a bit about what was going on with the Olympic movement and what kind of prepared the ground in the Olympic movement for mountain biking to come in. Now we're going to look at what was going on in mountain biking. So repack, by the early 1980s, repack has set the tone for the sport. Mountain biking was a sea of fresh energy and innovation focused on biking fun, hard riding in the outdoors. There was a sense of it was spontaneously and almost immediately a global thing. It took within 5 years, everybody everywhere was riding mountain bikes and everybody wanted a mountain bike. Equipment-wise, the bikes you could use at a races, they've been largely free format. It's a question of run what you brung, and the terrain will decide what works. And which is kind of what was the impetus for a mountain bike in the first place. They wanted a bike that was going to ride really well in the hills back behind Fairfax. So yeah, innovation is everywhere, and it became the second golden era for cycling worldwide after that, at the turn of the 19th, 20th century. Meanwhile, in Europe, the white gold crisis was beginning. And the white gold crisis was in response to global warming. What they were noticing at the ski resorts, white gold being snow, right? So what they were noticing at the ski resorts is that the skiing seasons were getting shorter and the snow lines were getting higher. And they were noticing this as early as the early 1980s. And obviously they were worried about their business disappearing. And so they started looking around. They'd heard about mountain biking and they thought this could be a really good way for them to generate revenue in the summer months. This led to a rather amusing happening whereby in 1982, France's early mountain bike cheerleader, a guy named Stéphane Auvet, he organized a mountain bike demonstration event at this French ski resort called La Plagne. And he actually got the French bicycle company Peugeot to pay for Gary Fisher to make a trip with, it would have been one of these bikes. This was one of the Fisher early mountain bikes. It's actually from 1982, that bike. So he took that bike, or a similar model, on Peugeot's dime to this French ski resort, to a mountain bike demonstration event there. And yeah, to show off mountain bikes and mountain biking. And I'm pretty sure it has to be one of the few times in cycle manufacturer history that a company has actually paid for its competitor to come to an event to publicize their product. But that's the kind of thing that was happening back then. Meanwhile, in the UK, in 1983, a farmer in Wales started this event called Man versus Horse. It was on a 25-mile single-loop course through hilly, big hills, mountainous terrain, and forests in Wales. A couple of years after that, somebody suggested that this farmer add bikes to his race, and so he made it Man versus Horse versus Bike. And this caught the attention of some American bike racers, mountain bike racers, and in 1985 Jackie Phelan crossed the Atlantic to compete in this event. And I think that she's the first US mountain bike racer that I know of to go and compete in Europe. A year later, a guy named Roy Rivers went and competed. I don't know if anybody knows that name. Okay, excellent. Okay, all right. So these, I should say that in the year 1989, a British mountain bike racer named Tim Gould, whose name may be familiar to some here, he actually beat the horse. And that was the first, and I think only time a horse was beaten in that race.
Jackie actually told me a couple of days ago that she beat all the male racers and she just lost to one horse.
Oh, really? Excellent. Meanwhile, in Germany, so we're talking about, this happened in the deep south of Germany. These are the European Alps, and they're stretching. This is looking from the east to the west. Over here we've got, this is Venice here, this is Austria, this is Munich here, Black Forest is here, and this place is Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and it looks like this, which to me looks like pretty fabulous mountain bike terrain. So this guy, there's a couple of event organizers, Heini Albrecht and Chester Fabricius. In the early 1980s, these two had been organizing tennis events and things like that. And then they saw mountain biking and thought, we have to do this. It's, we're in the right part of the world to be doing this. It's going to be great. And so they started organizing one-day events in this town of Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and quickly came up with the idea of a series. And this would be a 5-race series taking place in the Europe's Alpine nations: France, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, Italy. And they started shopping it around among sponsorship agencies and so on, and it reached Grundig. And I'll talk a bit more about Grundig in a minute. And so it reached Grundig. Grundig picked up the idea after a year or so. And then Heine was hired on by. So what happened at Grundig is that if they wanted to be a title sponsor of a race series, they couldn't be organising a race series themselves, but they wanted a lot of control over it. And so the deputy head of marketing, a guy called Dieter Schneider, he resigned from his job and set up a sports marketing company called AMC. And so AMC then contracted with Grundig to run the Grundig Challenge. And they hired on Heine as their operations manager. And he was there until about 1993, I think was his last year there, and he sort of got pushed out in the end. He went on then he stayed in mountain biking, and he founded the Trans Rockies races and so on. So he's done a lot of, really a lot of big and very impactful events in mountain biking, and in my mind he remains one of the most influential organisers in the history of the sport, partly for his the type of races that he's created, but also just his durability as well. He stayed with it and kept on going. So 1988, enter Hans Bartel. And this guy really he's the linchpin. Without Hans Bartel being who he is and how much he loved mountain biking and what he was doing with mountain biking, it's highly unlikely that it would have made it into the Olympics at all. And so he was the director of marketing at Grundig. Grundig was a significant sized maker of household electronic devices. They had pretty much a worldwide market. In the US, they were best known for making a pretty neat small shortwave radio. So a bit about Hans. He was a kind of old school, benevolent, wealthy kind of guy, and in my mind, a proper big shot. He was an A-grade top fella. I met him a lot of times, and he was like, for somebody who was at the C-suite executive, he was really very, very generous with his time, down-to-earth kind of guy, very friendly. He took his family to a whole load of World Cup mountain bike and snowboard events over the year. They had a snowboard series in winter and mountain biking in summer. So we just enjoyed it. He didn't hang out in the VIP tent. He'd actually be out walking around the course, talking to people, and just really enjoying the scenario there. He told me that in Norway in 1990, he'd created, through the Norwegian Grundig distributor, that he'd created a national high school mountain bike race series, which I think was probably, and he was so proud of having done this as well. He was of getting high school kids on mountain bikes, and I think that it was probably the first high school mountain bike race series. So anyway, he's Austrian by birth, from the Alpine town of Kaprun, which was, I think, pretty much every year on the Mountain Bike World Cup circuit. They were spending a lot of money on the Mountain Bike World Cup. They were spending, so back in 1990, the agreed sum was $4.2 million per year. And as part of that, the World Cup race organizer would receive a $35,000 bursary from Grundig to help with the event costs, which is quite a big thing for an event organizer to get that in cash. It means that they can do a heck of a lot more than they would otherwise. And that sort of benevolence and happiness flowed over into the athletes and the general mood at these World Cup races. And so everybody, they had a really, I don't know, it was kind of like, it was hard to describe, but it was just a great feeling at these events. And And this amount of money was way more than the sport was actually worth in terms of like as a in hard sponsorship terms. Mr. Bartel, he was aware of this, and he said that his fellow directors on the Grundig board criticised him for it and kind of teased him about it. And he said he felt that he was doing the right thing with the company's sponsorship money. In my mind, it was a patronage more than a sponsorship, and it lasted for 10 years and provided a level of stability to the sport, which is what was really required for it to grow as it did, and be noticed. But well, to be noticed the way it was, and for all of the politicians involved in getting into the Olympics to win the arguments that they needed to have, which were many, and quite heated, from what I'm told. And then there was this guy. This is a guy called a Belgian man called Jean-Claude Garot, and I call him the Nearly Man because he nearly became like the main international sponsor for mountain biking. And if the UCI hadn't come along, then he would have been much more involved in it. So Jean-Claude Garot, he ran a magazine called Winning, which some of you may recall from that time. It was primarily a road and triathlon magazine with different editions in different countries, UK, USA. I think there was a German language edition of it as well. And this was the first non-specialist sports publication to embrace mountain biking. Like straight anywhere in the world that I'm aware of, straight away, this guy just said, okay, this thing, mountain biking, is brilliant. We're going to give it our full support. And he used to come up with these funny sort of ads, like this one here, here I am, and here I'll stay. And these are really in response to the kind of pushback that mountain biking was getting from the road cycling community. And Garot knew that his magazine was popular with road cyclists, and so he placed these provocative kind of ads in it I think to needle people, but also to let them know that mountain biking, wasn't just because people used to say it's a fad. It's going to last a couple of years. We're not going to get involved. We're not going to waste our time with it. So he was a big sponsor of the Grundig series in 1988 and 1989. And so this, you can see here, this is a full page ad that he was running for that. And also he was, the other picture here is of the Aminona. So that's the 1987 World Championship in Crans, Montana. One thing, let me see, well, I might come to it here. So, partly thanks to so I should say Garot was pushed out by the UCI when they wanted to make a World Cup. Essentially, they said to Garot, we can't have a magazine being a big sponsor of the Mountain Bike World Cup. So you're out. So the series grew fast. In 1988, it was 4 rounds: Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, Austria, Italy. 89, it was 5 rounds, with 2 races in the UK, one of them in London, and the other one in Scotland, Aviemore. I actually rode in both of those races. And then in 1990, it grew to 9 rounds. The series prize purse in 1990 was 250,000 Deutschmarks, which is $155,000 or so. And so the winner of the men's race at each round got $5,000. The winner of the women's race at each round got $3,000. These guys had a really good, so AMC, who was the marketing company that was putting on the World Cup, the Grundig Challenge, I should say, they had a pretty good TV editing operation run by a guy named Rainer Zersch, who'd been working for Adidas in their sports marketing department. And they would put together a videotape same day and get that out to Eurosport and the Super Channel, and then also to national TV companies that would take it. And those companies would receive the tape on either Sunday night or else Monday after the race and broadcast it. And so mountain biking was getting a lot of Europe-wide TV coverage. It also, by 1990, also had a pretty good list of sponsors. We can see Tissot, Scott Bikes, Shimano, Volvo, Adidas, Pan Am. Penthouse was involved. I think Penthouse, it was seen as, once they realized how many women participated in mountain bike racing, Penthouse was no longer a serious sponsor. So looking at, looking at Europe, US riders coming to Europe, which was also an extremely important part of the sport being recognized by the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. So 1987, 88, and 89, you had world championships in both USA and Europe, which was creating a lot of confusion, even though US riders were winning both world championships in both continents during those years. But the people who really, actually, I'll just throw in there that the fact that American riders were coming to Europe and winning the world championships in Europe was really a thorn in the side for a lot of the top European riders. They were really, not bitter about it, but definitely unhappy, and felt like things were not the way they should be. They were pretty high-level racers, not nearly as experienced as the top American pros, but definitely felt there was a definite sense of them against us, and we need to sort of set things straight, which added quite a lot of interest, I think, to the competition at the time. And then, so in 1989, Mike Closer, I think Mike Closer in my mind is and to a slightly lesser extent, but not much lesser extent, Sarah Ballantyne, the US athletes who really made the biggest difference in creating the transatlantic bridge. Because both of those riders were, they're both really great people to be around, and everybody liked them and enjoyed having them at the races. But just having their presence there, like they each raced a full season in Europe. In Closer's case, it was 2 seasons, and that was really quite a big thing for development, for awareness of European racing also in the US, because then these were, they're sort of like emissaries, you might say, or ambassadors, and so they would report back to all of their US-based racing communities. And so there was a lot of exchange of information and knowledge about what was going on. 1990 was the year when things really started to pick up. That was when the UCI decided that they were going to start talking seriously about having a UCI Mountain Bike World Cup. And more US racers competed in Europe in 1990. So there were 2 females, Sarah Ballantyne and Nancy Walker-Aubrey. I don't know if anybody here knows Nancy Walker-Aubrey. I'm not sure, I think she may have been like US born but living in Europe. But I'm putting her down as an American rider anyway. Among the men, those who've raced a full season or a good chunk of the season were Mike Closer, Mike Jordan, a guy called Mark Analik. And so this is actually a picture of Mark Analik here, taken more recently. Like, you recognize Closer here and Sarah, obviously. And oh yeah, this guy is worth noting as well. So this is a guy, and this is kind of how it was back then. This is a summertime race on a mountainside on a hot day in Europe. And we all know how it is when you're climbing at 5 miles an hour up a mountainside and the sun's beating on you, and how hot it is. And yeah, you know, he's wearing a full sleeve nylon wind jacket. Really feeling the heat. You know, some of the guys we'd race against in England would show up with a backpack, like they got a tent. It's like it's a 5-mile circuit, and but we're going out in the countryside, So yeah, so then so Mark Analik, George Hope, Rich Sangali, who was Rich's idea, I think. Well, I'll just read you something that I wrote. I wrote this for Zap Zapata Espinosa in Mountain Bike Action back in May 1990. So I write, Closer, Analik and Hope have all had at least one full season's racing experience here in Europe, so they'll know what to expect from the competition. Closer and Analik have both been working hard in the closed season to keep competitive with the front runners, as the pressure from beneath increases. Jordan and Sangali, on the other hand, are newcomers to the Euro scene. Sangali, who was an ex-Norma pro, actually took a year out of competition with the intention of making a comeback this season in Europe. He was stunned at the sheer pace of the riders here and has some intensive training to do before he can rank among the best at this level. Jordan is in better shape, but he too was surprised by the standard in Europe, commenting, and this I thought was pretty interesting and perceptive and quite true, commenting that the difference between US and Euro scene at the very top is slight, but that Europe has a vastly greater number of riders jostling for position just beneath the top half dozen competitors. And I think that single fact is what really changed things going into the 1990s for a lot of the US racers and racing on the World Cup circuit. All of these riders who in 1990 were nearly there, by 1992 they were there, and so the number of riders in Europe who could, many of whom had come from cyclocross, which is a 1-hour race, and they're just so they've got the speed. All they have to do is they just have to build up their endurance for a 2.5 hour race, and so that's what happened. So at the same time, there was also the number of European riders a bit later going to the USA to race. There was a guy called Jan Wijak, Polish guy who I was aware of, who raced in Scott. He didn't really hang around very long at the top level. The top riders were two English guys called Tim Gould and David Baker, who were racing for the Peugeot team. That's Gould and that's Baker. And then this guy, Thomas Frischknecht. So what happened with him, I'm not sure how aware many people are about this. This was Tom Ritchie, at the suggestion of Don Meyer and Dave Mack, as he's known, suggested that Ritchie go and scout good cyclocross races in Europe for the Ritchie team. And so he found this kid, Thomas Frischknecht, whose father had been 5 times second in the World Championships. He was known as the Eternal Second. And the rather sad thing for Thomas Frischknecht is that he actually continued his father's legacy. I think that he also got 5 seconds in the World Championship. So 1989, Tim Gould wins the Norba final in Big Bear, which was just a huge thing for the European mountain bikers who'd been so ticked off about top Americans coming over and winning the European World Championships. So this was getting one back for the Europeans. And he actually won the hill climb at the World Championships. It wasn't a World Championship event, but he was pretty happy about that too. So 1990, Frischknecht gets the silver medal at Durango behind Ned Overend, and then Tim Gould gets the bronze. one thing about these guys, so another reason that a lot of the European guys weren't doing quite so well in the late 1980s is that their bikes weren't all that competitive. Like a lot of the European bike manufacturers started making a bike for very steep mountainous terrain, and it was more for recreational riding than racing. It was quite different to a bike like this, which is much closer to the sort of like to the. It was essentially a similar kind of position to a road racing bike. You've got a long stretched out position, flatter back, quite aerodynamic, and it was just a very fast bike. This is actually it's custom made for Gould and Baker by an English frame builder called Chaz Roberts, and it's a model called White Spider, and I think he was using, he was like maybe 753 or Columbus Nivachrome or something like that. It was a very nice tubing, yeah, they just put the Peugeot stickers on it, and that was fine with Peugeot as well, actually. This guy here is Simon Burney, and he was a significant factor in their success. Simon was a former pro cyclocross racer himself. He destroyed his knee and could no longer race, and he became a very influential team manager. He was a great leader for the team, and was really good about making sure they were doing the right training and preparation for the race. And at that stage also, having a team manager like that in mountain bike racing was fairly uncommon. So, and then Simon went on to be, he's like he stayed in mountain biking. He is currently the mountain bike consultant for the International Cycling Union. So he goes to all the World Cup and World Championship races and just makes sure things are done properly. So moving on to 1999, this is the first year of the actual Grundig World Cup, which was a pretty big thing. But it's also somewhat complicated. It was won that year actually by, again, two US riders, Sarah Ballantyne and John Tomac, and that's the year that Tomac, he raced the series on a bike with drop bars, which was pretty great, you've got to say. The complication with that was with sponsorship, and the sponsorship became a really big problem, because you had sets of sponsors in North America and a set of sponsors for the rest of the world, and that almost tore the whole thing apart. Like the sponsor disagreements, the conflicts, and if the sponsor had pulled out, then everything wheels come off the wagon. It doesn't work out. So you've got this thing, how to bake a World Cup cake. You've got all the things that you have to consider to make it all work. Are the athletes, the fans, the general riders, like the general market. They have to be buying bikes, basically. The bikes themselves have to be up for prevailing market conditions, the venues, the sponsors, the event organisers, the fixers, the mechanics and managers, the manufacturers, the sports governing bodies, journalists and spectators. All of these things have to be pulled, they all have to be in the right juxtapositions, I guess, the right line for things to work out okay. So having the right ingredients is one thing, but getting the quantities right and mixing the right amount in the right order, baking for the right duration at the right temperature, there are layers of complexity to that. There was an awful lot going on behind the scenes, but the races then were still pretty fun. The most notorious and fun venue for World Cup races was in Canada, a place called Mont Saint Anne, and these are some guys who got dressed up for one of their banquets. And then this is an athlete's party, like athlete VIP party at Mont Saint Anne in 1993, I think. So the top racers in the world got conned into getting dressed up and sort of like doing a drag show. This is Austrian Gerhard Strobelek, Dave Wiens, Thomas Frischknecht, Bob Roll, and I think this is Tim Rutherford. I'm not quite sure, but yeah. that was they thought. So what happened there? They thought that they were going to be judging. It was advertised as a beauty contest for the female athletes on the circuit, and so they pulled these guys. These guys were going to be the jury, and they pulled them into a room, like a briefing room, to just tell them what, like the criteria they were looking for, and they noticed that there were all of these like bikinis and women's swimsuits hung on coat hangers when they got in there, and somebody said, what are those for? And Chantal at Gestev, the organizer, said, well, those are for you to wear, guys. And they realized at that point they'd been had. They went along with it, and it was it was one of many very, very fun nights. But like I said, behind the scenes, things were really getting very, very testy at those events. And which brings us to this guy, Chris Payne, who was the fixer. Chris was a pretty extraordinary individual himself. And he's English. He went to a posh school called Ampleforth, which is in the north of England. It's run by members of the clergy, and he was actually chosen there for a career in the clergy. They picked him as somebody who had the right qualities for that. After school, he went to Sandhurst, which is the UK equivalent of West Point, and joined the UK Army. He trained in military intelligence. He then left the army and became a ski bum. And in the summertime, in 1989, he became my racing team manager. That's how I came to know him. He taught me the expression, if you'll pardon the language, bullshit baffles brains, which, how should that turn out? So early in 1990, when I was involved in setting up the British Mountain Bike Federation, and we got funding from the Sports Council to do that. It was much the same as what went on here, that we really had to join up at some point with the national, the existing national governing body, which was then the British Cycling Federation. And so I recruited him. He was in Switzerland at the time. I flew out there and told him he should come back and apply for the job as the secretary of the British Mountain Bike Federation. He did that. He got that job. He went to Durango for the 1990 World Championships, and so the thing about Chris Payne is that everybody trusted him. He's just a very, very reassuring kind of person, and everybody thought he was just, squeaky clean, honest guy, and like generally speaking, he is. Like unless he's bullshitting you, but he is a real straight shooter down. And so Phil Milburn, who was then the head of USA Cycling, he lobbied for Chris Payne to become the first technical delegate for the UCI for mountain biking. It worked very well for USA to have an English-speaking person doing that job. It made communication far easier, and there was more of a cultural link as well. USA was extremely important in the establishment of mountain biking in the UCI, partly because, like in Europe, then they were always talking about the American market. How do we tap into some of these American dollars? How do we bring some of these American dollars into cycling? And so that was a really big attraction for the UCI about mountain biking. And for that reason, the head of USA Cycling was pretty influential with the fledgling Mountain Bike Commission. So Chris Payne got the job in Switzerland as the UCI technical delegate. That means he went to all of the events. And really, without him being at all of those events, I think that all of these sponsor disagreements would have busted the whole thing apart. But he pulled it all. He was able to keep it all together. I had to listen to him in the bar after these meetings, and he'd come out just swearing about how awful sponsors were and stuff. And we'd sit at the bar and he'd just unload. But then at the end of it, the event organisers would come up to him and just give him the warmest hugs and just say, "Chris, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And I was never in those meetings. I never really knew exactly how he persuaded everybody to, to stay on board, but he did. And yeah. So anyway, I mentioned earlier that at the end of when Velo News fired me, I got the contract for the UCI website, and this guy Chris Payne was the guy who got me that contract. He was so annoyed when he felt, and Chris was the reason why UCI did not get the official World Cup guide contract. He made a promise to Anne McQuaid, who was in the McQuaid, I don't know if anybody knows a guy called Pat McQuaid, who was the president of the UCI a few years ago. So the McQuaids are kind of a clan in cycling. And anyway, it's actually quite a long, involved story. He owed her a favor, and she really wanted the contract, and so she got the contract to do that. And Chris was he's always been a bit of a champion of the underdog as well. And Velo News then was kind of, was a top dog, and Anne wanted she just wanted a piece of the pie, and so she got it. And he was really annoyed, but because of that, I got booted out from my job as European correspondent for mountain biking at Velo News. And so he said, well, damn it, I'll just give you the UCI website contract, which Velo News were also bidding for at the time. And so that's how that happened, and that's how a lot of those things happened, actually. So anyway, Chris had this thing called homologation, which was, as his job as technical delegate, he had to go around and make sure everything at the event conformed to a very strict set of standards imposed by the UCI. He hated it because he felt like it stifled a lot of the innovation and creativity around the sport of mountain biking. And as the UCI kind of tightened its grip on the sport, he left. He left straight after Atlanta in '96. And to the day, he regrets much about what happened, with mountain biking in the UCI. He's not tech savvy at all, but somehow he became the senior technical officer at the IOC, which is his current job. He talked his way into it, which he was extremely good at that kind of thing. So he's another person without, if somebody else had been, if his successor had been in the job, then again, probably things would have fallen apart. So this part is it's just an example of the UCI weighing in, weighing down the sport. So we've got a picture here of three cyclists. This is my mate Rory Hitchens, he worked for Diamondback UK. This is actually Jason McRoy, the late Jason McRoy, who was a very popular UK downhill mountain bike racer. This is before he rode for Specialized, and then this is Paul Hinton, who actually got me into mountain bike racing in the first place. But the reason that this picture is here, if anybody's noticing that the wheel size on Rory's bike's a bit bigger than these guys, and that's because it's a 29er. And this picture is taken in 1991. So Rory's got a 29er in 1991. It's made by Diamondback. It was called the Overdrive, and they made this bike for Dave Wings, Dave's about 6'2", and he felt that the 26-inch wheel was just too small for him, and so they made this bike for him. And the UCI promptly said, no, a mountain bike can only have 26-inch wheels, and that was that for the 29er. They could have been because it wasn't used on the race circuit, the bike just kind of disappeared. And so the 29er didn't take off in 1991, which it probably should have done. So here's another person who is another unrecognized person, who was also quite an extraordinary guy, without whom it wouldn't have all come together. Marc Lemay, he's just a funny French lawyer. French-speaking lawyer from Quebec, so Canadian, but from 1991 he was the president of the Canadian Cycling Association. He discovered mountain biking in California while he was at the '84 Olympics, in LA, he met Gary Fisher and was, and then also another guy who was there was Patrice Drouin, who was a part of the race organisation in Gestev in Mont Saint Anne. Patrice did something similar to what I was doing in the UK. Patrice went to Marc Lemay as the head of the Canadian Cycling Association and asked him to bring mountain biking under the national governing body umbrella. And then Patrice went on to design, Patrice and Chantal designed the Commissaires course, the first Commissaires course, which was also necessary before you could have a World Cup circuit. You have to have the Commissaires. So, Marc made all the political connections in FIAC. They'd learned, FIAC was suspicious of off-road cycling. They'd had a very bad experience with BMX. And so he took all of that into account, and he laid the foundations there for an international governing body for mountain biking. He made the initial negotiations with Grundig to form the Mountain Bike World Cup. He's the guy who kicked out Jean-Claude Garreau and Winning Club, said they couldn't be part of it. So yeah, then he worked with Patrice and Chantal to make the Commissaires course. They fixed the first 4 World Championships venues pretty early on, which are going to be Durango, Il Ciocco in Italy, Bromont in Canada, and then Métabile depends on which part of France you come from, how you pronounce that. And then Marc was the first UCI Mountain Bike Commission chair, starting in 1993. And he quit at the end of 1996, and he just said, too much has changed. Now my sport is no longer a baby. It grew too fast. And he also said, if not for Grundig, mountain bike would not have become an Olympic sport. He told me this I called him in 2020 for a book that I was writing about. I am writing about the subject. Okay, so we're moving back to the IOC now. So, between 1976 and 1996, the number of nations present rose from 65 to 150, and the Olympics was becoming really, really, really hard to manage. There were more athletes, more officials, more press, more beds, more dinners, more bus rides, more press, more everything. So in Sydney 2000, there were 11,000 members of the media at that event. Well, that's just journalists, TV crews. So, IOC members were reminded in 1991 that the main concern of the IOC is to limit the Olympic program to such a size that enables each and every provincial organising committee to be in a position to host a successful games. They set a limit of 15,000 participants. So that's 10,000 athletes, 5,000 officials. Now what that did is that really constrained it. It meant that adding new sports was extremely difficult. So, during the 1990s, each sport that was put forward for inclusion in the Olympic program had to fulfill these conditions. It had to be practiced on 4 continents and in 75 countries for men's events, and 3 continents and 40 countries for women's events. So beyond the principles, it was actually an extremely complicated process for geopolitical, economic reasons, and but the head of the IOC, Mr. Samarank, had decided that the Olympics needed more pro athletes. We're looking forward to the 1996 Games now, so we needed more pro athletes, we needed more female athletes, and mountain biking potentially fit that bill. So the boss guy was interested, and that was also critically important. The other thing that was critically important is that the UCI needed to modernize. Mountain biking had created a model that Hein Verbruggen, the president of the UCI, could then use to influence other disciplines in cycling. And so the UCI, mountain biking was serving a purpose there as well. Both UCI and IOC needed mountain biking in the Olympics, essentially. And mountain biking thought it needed to be in the Olympics. But yeah, like I said, actually I haven't said this yet, but The IOC said if a sport wishes to introduce a new event, it must be regarded as a replacement event. Breaking more eggs. So the UCI needed Verbruggen, the UCI needed a stand on the future of mountain biking, Olympic road and track events. There was a lot of grey area around it then. Verbruggen proposed to drop the 100-kilometre team time trial and team pursuit. Now, Italy had historically done very well in the team time trial. It was pretty much guaranteed medal for them. So they were really reluctant and resistant to dropping it. Plus, there was a historical thing about the time of the team time trial. It had been in the Olympic program since 1912. So dropping it they were letting go of more than just, a medal for the Italian team. Austria also opposed it. They likened it to the shooting union introducing poaching to the IOC, to the Olympic Games, which just goes to, it also gives you an indication of attitudes towards mountain biking as well at the time. But Verbruggen was determined. He went to Samaranch and just with the argument, mountain biking is exciting. It's a visually appealing sport, makes good television. There's a youth appeal, appeals to the general population, and has high rate of female participation, and the 70% bike share in some markets. So LeMay was the one who got to figure the details on the ground, and this is where it got anyway. So he worked with Norba and the Atlanta Organizing Committee, ACOG, to lobby for mountain biking and determine how it could be worked into the schedule. They had to get all of that in place before the IOC was going to agree to it. So ACOG, they were not keen on the team time trial because it meant closing the Stone Mountain Freeway here for a full day, which was a pretty big. It's not an interstate; it's a state highway, but it was a pretty significant road, and they really didn't want to do it. So Norba and USA Cycling had been planning on getting mountain biking into the Olympics for the 2000 Games, but LeMay convinced them that the door might not still be open then. And so, although the deal that ACOG was offering was not great, USA Cycling thought they really had to accept it. And also, there was some impatience as well. He didn't need to twist their arm too hard. So in June 1993, the IOC provisionally accepts mountain biking in the Olympics if UCI drops the team trial. So then came, same year, we got the Mountain Bike World Championships in Métabif, France, and IOC members showed up to take a look before making the decision. They were making the decision. I've got a typo here. I've got September the 17th written twice. The lower one should actually be September the 18th. So 50,000 other people showed up to that on that Saturday the 17th too. And I don't know, at least a couple of us, I think, were at that event. Getting in there was a nightmare. I remember we drove in. There's just one road leading in. We drove in. I was with an American journalist, and we got about half a mile away from the venue, and the traffic was just stopped, and it wasn't moving. Behind us was the Argentina team bus, and the driver of that bus was just laying on the horn, and I stuck my. I don't know why, because he could see the traffic wasn't moving, and he was hoping that cars would move out of the way for him so he could get in. And I'm reporting there for the top magazine in the US, and also the world's top mountain bike magazine, and top magazine in the UK. And I'm not going to miss the start of the women's race, no way. So I wasn't going to pull over for him. And the guy jumps out of his bus, he comes and bangs on the window of my car, blow back. And I just said, we're not, we're not pulling over, and no one else is pulling over. And we actually did pull over, but we couldn't pull. We just pulled over to the side of the road. We both got out of our car, and we walked into the venue. And the Argentina team did the same. As we were doing that, we saw the athletes get off the bus, and they all started walking. And there were so many people trying to get in there. It was nuts. Which was worked out as far as the Olympic thing went. That worked out really well. And Verbruggen was there. The president of the UCI was there. He said to Mark LeMay, "Okay, you weren't joking about how popular sport is." Then the next day, the IOC Executive Committee accepts mountain biking officially into the 1996 Olympics. Which turned out to be a bit of a bummer. So the course that they were racing on was an over-length cyclocross course. It wasn't a mountain bike course at all. And it was designed by a guy working for Norba called Brian Stickle, who was a very good event organizer and a very competent person who I have a very high regard for. And he did his best with what was offered. What was offered was the equestrian 3-day eventing venue. So ACOG wasn't prepared, they weren't prepared to create a new venue for mountain biking. They said you got to go into an existing venue, which is the horse park. Now, and you can see, and this looks like, a pretty hilly course, but the thing you have to consider is that the biggest climb has just about 100 feet vertical. And I've seen a lot of cyclocross courses with a bigger climb than that. 6.6 mile course with 1,000 feet climbing total from 13 ascents. Normally in a mountain bike race, you'd expect 1,000 feet climbing on a 4-mile course. So anyway, that's what it was. We didn't really, flat tires were a very significant factor. So Stickle had designed the course with John Tomac in mind. So he made it as tight and technical as he could. Tomac, and also with those climbs, Tomac would have done pretty well on those. As it happened, Tomac didn't get selected. And so much for that idea. We didn't really like the whole event. Like you couldn't just roll up to the event. You had to get into this, you couldn't walk or ride your bike into the venue. You had to take something called a sanitized bus. And it was an alien experience for somebody who'd been on the Mountain Bike World Cup circuit for a few years by then. It was regimented, the course was artificial, and there was a certain air of excitement about it, but there was also a certain air of, did we really want this? And then came the hangover. So the party had not been all that great. Bart Brinchens and Paolo Pezzo won it. Nobody trusted that. None of the insiders trusted them. You can't make any accusations, but we all had our suspicions about extracurricular preparations. Thankfully, the US rider Susan DiMattei got a medal, which was really, really super important. And then there was that course, but we just tried to forget about that. So in 1997, sponsorship for mountain biking crashed. It crashed in the USA. At the end of 1997, Grundig left. And the US mountain bike scene it sort of deflated slowly over the following years. Mountain biking also went into the 4-year sponsorship cycle of all Olympic sports, meaning the first 2 years there's almost no money, and then the money starts to flow in the final 2 years, which is really tough on the athletes. The UCI then set up its own marketing department to handle mountain biking. Mark LeMay told me the UCI marketing department didn't really understand mountain biking. Chris Payne left the UCI. Mark LeMay resigned from the Mountain Bike Commission. UCI hires the ISL and IMG, who are the 2 main sports marketing companies in the world. They made a sponsorship valuation of the Mountain Bike World Cup. They both came back and said, you should never have let Grundig go. They're paying way more than you're going to get next. Yeah, as of 2024, after this Olympics, Simon Burney speculated on Facebook that mountain biking may be now on its way out of the Olympic Games. The Olympics having achieved what it wanted to through mountain biking, and I think that they're finding it a bit difficult to get the good mountain bike venues now on courses. But so I don't want to end up on a really negative note. So looking back to this slide, this image I showed you earlier, this event was, I actually took these pictures reporting for Mountain Biking UK magazine at the first round of the 1989 Grundig Challenge in Switzerland. And I saw one guy there who he was wearing a helmet which looked a bit like, it wasn't actually nearly as fancy as this. Like it was just a small, like 2 or 3, 2.5 inch round plastic sticker with a Red Bull logo stuck on the side of this guy's helmet. And that was pretty much the extent of Red Bull's mountain biking sponsorship in 1989. The company was started in 1987. By now, it's ranked 3rd globally behind Coca-Cola and Pepsi in the soft drinks market, and has been sponsoring the Mountain Bike World Cup. The Red Bull vision for mountain biking is far more interesting and exciting and fun than the UCI vision for mountain biking. And from what I hear, they're making much better courses now than was happening for a few years on the World Cup circuit. And so the future of World Cup mountain biking now really lies, I think, with Red Bull. And it's just the interesting thing to me about Red Bull is it's an Austrian company, and I think that they were in touch with. I just feel shades of Hans Bartel in Red Bull as a company, because you've got to look at the amount of money that Red Bull pours into sport. It's like everybody who drinks a can of Red Bull is sponsoring some kind of sporting event, which in my mind is okay. I don't personally like the product, but I like what they're doing with the profits from it. And so I think that pretty much brings us. Yeah, that pretty much brings us to the end of it. It was an extraordinary thing, and it is a testament to the tremendous value of the sport of mountain biking in many different ways, to many different people. It actually got an Olympic program in as short a time as it did, and it's sort of a pity thing the way things worked out the way they did. But I certainly think that recent developments have looked fairly positive, and frankly, if mountain biking leaves the Olympics, I personally won't be at all disappointed, and I think that might herald a new and different era for the sport of mountain biking, which I will certainly welcome. So thank you for listening.